Nawa, Shabashamayim, Kodash, Haya, Shamka, Yahawa, Malakwatka, Daba'a Ratazaka, Haya, Aisha, Ba'arataza, Kawa, Haya, Bashamayim, Nathan Nawa, Lakam, Kal Yawam, Wasalak Nawa, Kawabwat Nawa, Kasalak Nawa, Kawabwati Nawa, Wala'a, Tabaya Nawa, Banasayawan, Abo, Haushai Nawa, Mayan, Rai Kaya, Laka, Hamalakwat, Waha Allah, Wahatafa Aras, La Iwalamim, Ahmad.
After this manner therefore pray ye, Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, in earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. Lay not up for yourselves treasures upon earth, where moth and rust doth corrupt, and where thieves break through and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust doth corrupt, and where thieves do not break through nor steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also.
We're not fighting for riches of this world. We're not fighting for a position in this world. We're not fighting for a plot of land in this world to where we can claim our stake, and have an inheritance with the rest of the world. No, when we get our inheritance, we're going to get everything.
All right, Shalom. First and foremost, I would like to give all praise and glory unto Yahweh, Bahashim, Yahweh Shai, Bahashim, Kakadash, and double honors unto the apostles and the elders of GMS who rule well, teach well, being great examples to his younger brothers, and peace and blessings and salutations to the hopeful elect out there pushing his word and truth and in sincerity across the four winds in the name of Yahweh, Bahashim, Yahweh Shai, pushing to get up out of here. Shalom to the hopeful elect, the believers, the listeners whom have came back to the obedience of the scriptures through faith in Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai. All right, and what I want to get into today, is the system is not all right, the system is not broke, it's rigged. All right, just not for you. All right, which is me included. All right, which is not for us, but it's a title. But this is a good follow-up, by the same guy. Did the documentary on last night. And just show you that how these devils have systems, okay, to where is rigged for them. Okay, these devils brag about having a high IQ and natural selection and manifest destiny, which it was prophecy for these devils to be in power. Okay, but they make it seem as if just because they're superior people, okay, that they're on top. Okay, first of all, it's prophecy that has you devils on top. Okay, and you devils, you run a rigged system. Okay, to where you, all right, have created, a system, all right, for the masses to fail, all right, and for the few that come from these particular families, and for a while, a larger portion of the nation of Edom was winning. You know, they enjoy, you know, what they call white privilege. All right, but even that is dwindling as they're going into this new world order. Okay, and as we're gonna, you know, go into this video, I got, you're gonna see that these same names, all right, from these elite families, okay, they run, control everything. Okay, so I want to get a few precepts and then we'll segue into it. So this is Proverbs 15 and 27. It says, "He who profits unlawfully brings suffering to his own house." Okay, so these devils, what they've done, you know, how they set up, you know, these unjust, you know, these unfair, okay, systems, okay, where it impoverishes the masses, you know, and enriches the few. Okay, the devil has brought suffering to his own house. The whole house of Edom, the whole lineage of Esau, Edom, okay, will pay. All right, you lower level Edomites, you're no better because you would do the same thing if, you know, there was your lot, you know, within the nation of Edom. Okay, but it's meant for you just to be a Joe six pack. Okay, but then you have all these Edomite families, even though, you know, the elites hoard up most of the wealth. All right, these Edomites, all right, for a long time have been able to live well off the crumbs, you know, because as Israelites, we live off the crumbs of the crumbs, you know, from these elites. All right, these other Edomites, you know, they're able to still, they've been able for a long time to live, all right, above everyone else, all right, because of the robbery, okay, of the heads of their nation, man, okay, which are these bankers. You know, these bankers have been able to rob the wealth of the earth, okay, build up these cities and, you know, allow, you know, you Edomites, all right, to live well. Okay. And like I said, and if you know, lower tier Edomites were in the position of the bankers, you would do the same thing. Okay. But all you devils have benefited, all right, off the robbery, okay, of these elite bankers. Okay. You enjoy, you know, like I say, the Edomite privilege, you know, what they call white privilege. Okay. You know, you're able to get, you know, these loans and these particular things, and you know, you all right, everyday Edomites, you know, certain, you know, tricks to the trade, and you know, you get approved quicker and these different things. So they've given you the crumbs, okay, of their robbery. All right, they gave you a big portion of the crumbs, you know, and we get the crumbs from that. You know, as Israelites, us being the tail. Okay, but these devils have profited unlawfully because the earth was given into your hand. Okay, but the way these devils have ran the earth, okay, has been in a very wicked, all right, deceitful, cruel manner. Okay, and there's a punishment for that. All right, it says, "But he who hates bribes and does not receive nor pay them will live." You know, and that's the characteristics of a righteous judge. You know, which the Lord has, you know, us in this captivity being chastened. Okay, so we can be those righteous judges. See, we're being refined, you know, in this hell that we catch under the system. You know, we're being refined to be those righteous judges. Okay, their righteous leadership. You see, so as we're seeing how not to do, you know, we're being groomed up in how to do in righteousness, man. Okay, let's go here. All right, so we're gonna get a couple of precepts, set the foundation, then we'll segue to the video. Now this is the book, okay, of Jeremiah chapter 17 and 11, and this is an AMP, all right, the Amplified Bible. Jeremiah 17 and 11 says, "Like the partridge that hatched eggs which she had not laid." And see, what we have to understand about this capitalistic system, the system of capitalism, okay, it was meant for, all right, the elite few to benefit off the labor of the many. All right, these people are benefiting off labor. They have all this wealth that they didn't earn. You know, they're accumulating all the world's wealth that they're not earning. You know, they're earning this wealth through other men's labor. Okay. And this is what capitalism is all about. All right. Now, there was a time, you know, called free enterprise capitalism where, people were able to come up, and you had those success stories, okay, which they can happen within capitalism, okay. But now you see that's getting more rare, okay, because the system was meant, okay, to suppress. All right, you have a few that break through the crack, but that's becoming less and less because they're dismantling this place, but there was a time, where you can come up, start a business, you know, make something out of nothing. There was a time where you could do that, it was here and there. Okay. And then they pushed those stories like everybody had this opportunity to do that, but that's not the case. Okay. The system is only fixed for a few people to make it to a certain level. Okay. What they call the illusion of inclusion, and they do that on every level. Okay. So when you read Jeremiah 17:11, it describes, the system of capitalism, man. In this time, it said, like the partridge that hatches eggs which she have not laid, so is he who makes a fortune in ways that are unjust. Okay. And these devils, have made a fortune in ways that are unjust, man. This is a very rigged system. Okay, we're gonna get that word rigged. It said it will be lost, all right, to him before his days are over, and in the end he will be nothing but a fool, man. And Esau is finna be looked at like a goddamn fool, man. Okay, these people who have amassed all this wealth, okay, are going to lose it and go into captivity. Okay, is this the man? Okay, prophecy, all right, exalted this man, lifted this man up, okay, to dominate the earth, politically, militarily, economically, influence, okay, and prophecy is going to make him like a goddamn fool, man, because within, his rulership, okay, he made a fortune unjustly, man, okay, and we serve a righteous power, all right, so let's go from there. Let's get this in Proverbs. Then I'm going to get that definition for rig. Okay. It's Proverbs chapter 1. All right. In 16, it said, for their feet run to evil and they hurry to shed blood. And these devils go to war. All right. They go to wars to keep these systems in place. Okay. We have to understand all wars are banker wars, man. All right. They're funded and they're financed and they're for the agenda of the bankers. Okay, they give you this cover story on the and that happened with this, but ultimately it's the bankers that push these wars, all right, to keep this system in place. And now they're pushing for a war to switch the system over, because every war they establish a new system. Okay, after World War I, they got rid of the Ottoman Empire, all right, which was a monarch. They got rid of the czars, all right, Nicholas II, the czar in Russia. Okay, so they took them two monarchs off the board, okay, because it's easy to control, all right, a democratic, type, government system. It's easier to control, all right, a puppet government than a monarch. Okay, because a monarch has that, absolute power. Okay, so they took down the monarchs to divide, the power between the puppets. They will begin to infiltrate, they will begin to implant. Okay, so World War I, they took down, those two last major monarchies. Okay, which was Nicholas II, which they took a lot of gold from him. Okay, this is the last czar of Russia. Then the Ottoman Empire. Okay, and the Ottoman Empire, they had control over the land of Palestine. All right, where these small hats are at today. So World War I, broke up the Ottoman Empire, broke up, okay, the Russian, all right, monarchy, okay. And then, all right, it allowed, these small hats to begin to set up shop in the state of Israel, the land, well, the land of Palestine then, because it was after World War II, all right, in 1948, all right, in World War II, what happened? All right, the world reserve currency went from the British pound to the American dollar. Okay, the Bretton Woods Agreement, came out the World War II. Okay, then you had the 1948 small hats established the state of Israel. Okay, them imposters. Okay, in this third world war, they want to go from this old system of government to a digital system. That's their agenda for this third world war. Okay, but we know how this third world war is going to go. Okay, it said, for their feet run to evil and they hurry to shed blood. Indeed, it is useless, okay, to spread the baited net in the sight of any bird. And see, the Lord has us on game because we're that bird that's seeing this devil set up the trap. Okay, we know that this system is going digital and it's going to lead to what? The MOTB. Okay, so we're watching this devil set up this system, man. Okay, the Lord has us in the light. All right, and Lord will, we have the spirit to endure, all right, and resist during the hour of temptation, man, when these things are mandated. Okay, and it says, but when these people set a trap for others, they lie in wait for their own blood, man. So ultimately, the devil, everything he's doing, he's setting a trap for himself. Everything that this man has established, he's going to be trapped in it. Okay, he's going to start this war. Okay, that's going to unleash, all right, these nukes that's going to turn America to a desert. It's going to make the earth rail to and fro like a drunkard, destroying this man's infrastructure. And then Yahushua is going to return in the midst of this war. So this devil is only setting a trap for himself with everything that he's built up. All right. And he's been at this plan for a while. It says they set, all right, an ambush for their own lives and rush to their destruction, man. So as this devil is, running to this new world order, okay, on the back of Trump, okay, they're sprinting to this new world order, man. Okay, they got Trump running nothing but fade routes. Okay, no slants, no screen. The boy running straight fades, man. Straight fades. Every executive order is a fade for this new world order, but all they're doing is rushing to their own destruction, man. All right, it says, so are the ways of everyone who is greedy for gain. Greed takes away the lives of its possessors, man. So this devil's greed and ambition, okay, is leading him to ruin and captivity, man. Okay, so let's get this word for rig, and then we'll go into the video of Aratazah. So let's get this word for rig definition, and we play this video. All right, and there's no doubt about it. The system is rigged, man. All right, it ain't broken. It's rigged. People complain about, we need to change it. Look, the system ain't broken. It's working exactly how, okay, the all right, these elites wanted to work, man. Okay, so the word rig as a verb, it says to manage or conduct something fraudulently so as to reduce, all right, a result or situation that is advantageous to a particular person. Okay, to manage or conduct something fraudulently so as to produce or result, all right, or situation that's advantageous, all right, to a particular person, man. Okay, and it's fixed and it's rigged, okay, to produce results for the elites. Okay, that's the particular person, all right, that this system is rigged for. Okay, it never was meant to work in your favor. It only gave the appearance of working in your favor. All right, for a while. All right, that was temporal, and now, all right, it's coming out. All right, the whole time what this system was created to do, and it's doing it to a T. Okay, so let's get here to the video. Like I said, the same guy from yesterday. What's the name of the channel? You know, Economy Rewind. You know, he does pretty good. I subscribe to him. Well, he got pretty good content. I say we're gonna scrape them dry. You know, and until they, you know, it's only a while where they come for them. So, fair use. You know, I'm not getting any monetary gain off the video. All right, just use the material for educational purposes only. Fair use. All right, so let's play this. You know, he's gonna go back to the beginning. You know, when the Federal Reserve, all right, was established, okay, and how it was rigged, okay, from the beginning. So let's play this.
In November 1910, 7 men took a private train from Hoboken, New Jersey to Jekyll Island, Georgia. They represented 1/4 of the world's wealth. Over 10 days, in complete secrecy, they wrote the legislation that would create the Federal Reserve, America's central bank, privately owned by the very banks it's supposed to regulate. This wasn't a government operation. This was a conspiracy in the literal sense of the word. 7 private bankers meeting in secret, using fake names, drafting legislation that would give them control over the entire American money supply. And it worked. On December 23rd, 1913, with most of Congress gone home for Christmas, the Federal Reserve Act passed. 3 years after that secret meeting, these 7 men had achieved what no king, no emperor, no conqueror had ever achieved. They privatized the creation of money itself. And here's what should terrify you. The Federal Reserve isn't federal, and it has no reserves. It's a private banking cartel with a government-sounding name. And in the 111 years since Jekyll Island, it has never been fully audited by Congress. Not once. This is the story of how 7 men stole the American money supply, why the banks that created the Fed now control the Fed, and why every dollar in your pocket is a debt instrument owned by private bankers. Because understanding Jekyll Island isn't just history. It's understanding who actually controls your money, your savings, and your economic future. And let me show you exactly what happened in November 1910, who these 7 men were, how they pulled it off, and why you're still living under the system they created in secret 115 years ago. Before Jekyll Island, you need to understand the Panic of 1907, because every major change to the financial system happens during a crisis. And the Panic of 1907 was the crisis these bankers needed. In October 1907, the stock market collapsed. Banks failed across America. Depositors panicked and rushed to withdraw their money. Bank runs spread from New York to San Francisco. The entire financial system was on the verge of complete collapse. There was no central bank in 1907. America had tried central banks twice before. The first Bank of the United States, chartered in 1791, expired in 1811. The second Bank of the United States, chartered in 1816, was killed by Andrew Jackson in 1836. Jackson called it the monster and said, "The bold effort the present bank had made to control the government is but a premonition of the fate that awaits the American people should they be deluded into a perpetuation of this institution? Jackson won. America operated without a central bank for 77 years.
Yeah, so lucky. Yeah. So what I was saying, so what you had with the federal, what they call the Federal Reserve, they tried it twice, and like you said, they called it the Federal Reserve, because they want to disguise themselves, as a federal, ran institution, and ultimately they're privately owned banks, okay, by these elites, okay, and they tried to establish, all right, two central banks in America before this time of 1913, when the Federal Reserve Act was passed, so they tried to establish this before, all right, but these devils, all right, what we have to understand is that they always had these skirmishes and infighting of how the nation should be ran, okay, how, the earth should be ran, how certain systems should be ran, okay, so a lot of assassination that, because they tried to assassinate Andrew Jackson, I think twice. I know for sure once. It's in the documentary All Wars Are Banker Wars, but they tried to assassinate Andrew Jackson twice, and eventually he ran off. The central bankers. Okay, so like it said, America went 77 years without a central bank. Okay, they didn't have any debt. Okay, people's money were backed by actual, all right, silver and gold. Okay, but when the feds came in, they changed all of that, man. When the central bankers disguised as the Federal Reserve, when they came in, they gonna change the game. Okay, so these devils, they always have little infights when it comes to particular policies and systems, that they want to be established. Okay, and the bankers, they finally infiltrated, American government, okay, and established this Federal Reserve, all right, which is the nightmare people are crying about today. Okay, so let's play this.
But without a central bank, when the panic hit in 1907, there was no lender of last resort, no one to inject liquidity. The system was collapsing. Enter J.P. Morgan. John Pierpont Morgan was the most powerful banker in America. His bank, J.P. Morgan and Company, controlled vast railroad networks, steel production, and financial institutions. When the panic hit, Morgan personally organized the rescue. He locked the major bankers in his library, forced them to pool resources, and stopped the bank runs through sheer force of will and concentrated capital. Morgan saved the system. But here's what most people don't understand. Morgan didn't save the system out of civic duty. He saved it to prove a point. The point was this: America needed a central bank, and the bankers should control it. The panic of 1907 killed 25 banks and trust companies. Businesses failed, workers lost jobs, the stock market fell 50%. But J.P. Morgan emerged more powerful than before. He'd proven that private bankers could control the money supply better than the government, or so they claimed. In 1908, Congress passed the Aldrich-Freeland Act, creating a National Monetary Commission to study banking reform and prevent future panics. The chairman of that commission was Senator Nelson Aldrich, Republican from Rhode Island. Aldrich was one of the most powerful senators in America. He was also J.P. Morgan's business partner and father-in-law to John D. Rockefeller Jr. The commission was supposed to study European banking systems and recommend reforms. But what it actually did was provide cover for the bankers to write their own legislation. And they would do it in secret at a private resort where no one could see what they were creating.
We're Phoenix Energy, a family-owned oil company focused on unleashing American oil from North Dakota and Montana.
On the night of November 22nd, 1910, 7 men boarded a private rail car at Hoboken Station in New Jersey. They were told to come alone. No assistants, no secretaries. They were instructed to arrive separately to avoid being seen together. And most importantly, they were told to use first names only. No one could know who they were or where they were going. This wasn't paranoia. This was necessity. If the press discovered that the most powerful bankers in America were meeting in secret to write banking legislation, there would be riots. The American public hated the big banks. They hated J.P. Morgan. They hated Wall Street. Any legislation written by bankers would be dead on arrival, so they disguised it as a duck hunting trip. The private rail car traveled south for 1,000 miles. The destination was Jekyll Island off the coast of Georgia. Jekyll Island was owned by a private club, the Jekyll Island Club, whose members included the Morgans, Rockefellers, Vanderbilts, and Goulds, the wealthiest families in America. It was the perfect location. Remote, private, exclusive, and most importantly, controllable. No outsiders allowed. The 7 men who arrived at Jekyll Island represented approximately $600 billion in assets, measured in 1910 dollars. That's equivalent to roughly $20 trillion today. To put that in perspective, these 7 men controlled 1/4 of the world's wealth.
7 men control 1/4 of the world's wealth. All right. It's rigged. Okay. System ain't broke, it's rigged. Man, it's crazy. 7 men. And these are representatives of, certain elite family. Now, these Rockefellers, which is the American branch of the Rothschild, you're going to hear them in the mix tough. Okay. J.P. Morgan, they're in the mix tough, man. Okay. Let me get a precept too, these secret councils, because, let's go here to the book of Isaiah, chapter 29, verse 15 in the AMP. It says, woe, which is destruction. All right. And these devils have nothing but destruction pronounced on them in the scripture. And that's why they want to try to also create a new reality, man, because they're guilty as hell in this reality. All right. But you can't create a new reality, man. Okay? You're subjugated to the will of Yahweh Shem Al Shai. It says, whoa, judgment is coming to those who try deeply, okay, who try to deeply hide their plans from the Lord, who deeds are done in the dark, and who say who sees us or who knows us, man. Okay, and this is why the Lord has all these things coming out, man. And the Lord is reaching back. We all in 1913. All right, going into detail of this devil's wickedness, man. So the Lord got this nigga searched out, man. Okay, and every time frame with this nigga in power, it's some wickedness there, man. Okay, so man, this devil, all right, he has a lot to pay for, man. Let's go back. It's crazy, man. Between these 7 men, which they represented, 7 families, all right. Or particular elite families, So let's play this.
Let me introduce you to the conspirators. Nelson Aldrich, the political power. Senator Nelson Aldrich, Republican from Rhode Island, chairman of the National Monetary Commission. Aldrich was known as the general manager of the nation because of his control over Senate finances. He was one of the wealthiest senators in America, with investments in banking, sugar, rubber, and railroads. More importantly, Aldrich was family. His daughter married John D. Rockefeller Jr., making Aldrich the grandfather of the Rockefeller brothers, who would dominate American business and politics for the next 70 years. Nelson Rockefeller, Gerald Ford's vice president and governor of New York, was his grandson. Aldrich's job at Jekyll Island was simple. Take whatever the bankers created and guide it through Congress, make it seem like a government reform, not a banker's takeover. Frank Vanderlip, National City Bank. Frank Vanderlip was president of National City Bank of New York, the largest bank in America, and predecessor to today's Citibank. National City Bank was controlled by William Rockefeller, John D. Rockefeller's brother. Vanderlip represented the Rockefeller banking interests. Vanderlip later wrote about Jekyll Island in his autobiography, admitting, "I do not feel it is any exaggeration to speak of our secret expedition to Jekyll Island as the occasion of the actual conception of what eventually became the Federal Reserve System. We were told to leave our last names behind us. Discovery would have been fatal to our plan, fatal to their plan, because the public would have rejected it immediately if they knew bankers wrote it." Paul Warburg, Kuhn, Loeb and Company. Paul Warburg was a partner at Kuhn, Loeb and Company, one of the most powerful investment banks in America. But more importantly, Warburg was German. He came from the Warburg banking family of Hamburg and Frankfurt, one of the most influential banking dynasties in Europe. Warburg brought European central banking expertise to Jekyll Island. He'd studied the Bank of England, the Reichsbank, and the Banque de France. He knew how central banks worked in Europe, how they created money, controlled interest rates, and most importantly, how they enriched private bankers while claiming to serve the public good. Warburg was the intellectual architect of the Federal Reserve. The other bankers had power and money. Warburg had the blueprint. Benjamin Strong, J.P. Morgan's lieutenant, Benjamin Strong represented J.P. Morgan's interests. He was president of Bankers Trust Company, which was controlled by Morgan. Strong would later become the first governor of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, the most powerful position in the Federal Reserve System. Strong's job at Jekyll Island was to ensure that Morgan's interests were protected in the new system, and he succeeded. When the Fed was created, the New York Fed became the dominant regional bank, and Strong ran it for 14 years until his death in 1928. Henry Davison, J.P. Morgan partner. Henry Davison was a senior partner at J.P. Morgan and Company. He was Morgan's most trusted lieutenant and one of the most powerful bankers on Wall Street. Davison's job was to coordinate the meeting and ensure that all the bankers' interests aligned. Charles Norton, First National Bank of New York. Charles Norton was president of First National Bank of New York, which later merged with National City Bank to form Citibank. Norton represented another arm of Rockefeller banking interests. A. Piatt Andrew, Assistant Secretary of the Treasury. This is the most revealing member of the group. A. Piatt Andrew was Assistant Secretary of the Treasury in President Taft's administration. He was the government official on the National Monetary Commission. His presence at Jekyll Island was crucial because it gave the meeting a veneer of official government business. But Andrew didn't represent the government. He represented the bankers. After Jekyll Island, Andrew left the Treasury and went to work for the bankers, coordinating the campaign to pass the Federal Reserve Act. For 10 days, these 7 men worked in complete secrecy at the Jekyll Island Club. They had the entire resort to themselves, no outsiders, no servants who might overhear, just 7 men with one goal: create a central banking system that would be controlled by private banks, funded by the government, and presented to the public as a reform to prevent panics. Here's what they had to solve. Problem 1. Americans hated the idea of a central bank. Andrew Jackson had killed the Second Bank of the United States for exactly this reason. Any legislation that created a central bank would be political suicide. Solution: don't call it a central bank. Call it the Federal Reserve System. Make it sound like a government agency. Use the word federal to imply government control. Use reserve to imply stability and backing. Problem 2. Americans hated Wall Street and the big New York banks. Any system that appeared to give more power to J.P. Morgan or the New York banks would be rejected. Solution: create multiple regional Federal Reserve banks spread across the country. Make it look decentralized, but structure the system so that the New York Fed controls everything. Problem 3. The government might actually try to control it. If this was truly a government institution, elected officials might use it for public purposes instead of banker profits. Solution: make it privately owned by the banks themselves, but give it government backing. The Federal Reserve banks would be owned by private member banks. These member banks would elect the directors. The government would appoint some board members, but the bankers would run the system day to day. This was the genius of Jekyll Island. They created a central bank that looked like a government agency, operated like a private cartel, and had the power to create money out of nothing. Let me explain how it works in simple terms. Before the Fed, money was relatively simple. Gold and silver were money. Paper dollars were certificates redeemable for gold. Banks couldn't create money out of thin air. They had to have gold reserves to back their lending. The Federal Reserve.
Your currency was supposed to represent, all right, the actual, gold and silver reserve that you have. So that's why they made a cute term called the Federal Reserve. They came up with a cute title, but it was false. Okay, because silver and gold, for a long time has been, the an indicator of wealth. All right, it was a value system. All right, it goes back even. Let's go here real quick to Genesis 13. Okay, and 1, and says, so Abram went out of Egypt. All right, he and his wife and all that he had, and Lot his nephew with him, into Negev, all right, the south country of Judah. And it said, now Abraham was Abram, his name was Abram then. Abram was extremely rich in livestock and in silver and gold. Okay, livestock and silver and gold. He had real assets. Okay, and silver and gold was always, a universal, all right, asset of trade. Okay, and dollars, because the word dollar goes into a measurement, and it's supposed to be a measurement, all right, of an asset. Okay, but as we're going to see, these devils, made the dollar back by nothing. All right, in which they've now created fake wealth. People have all these dollars. Okay, but these dollars do not, all right, translate, okay, the true wealth. And most people, people that are billionaires, they'll never see, like Jay-Z will never see $1 billion in one room at a time. Okay, it's just a number on the computer. Okay, and he's gonna get into it. You see, but yeah, just go into, even in the Bible, you go back to Genesis. There was always a measure of wealth, with silver and gold, livestock, tangible assets. Okay, with these devils, all right, with this this money magic that they're on, they just created wealth out of nothing, man. All right, well, this is it's a big magic trick. You see that these warlocks have pulled off, man, these bankers. Okay, so run back just a little bit. He's gonna explain it. All right.
Before the Fed, money was relatively simple. Gold and silver were money. Paper dollars were certificates redeemable for gold. Banks couldn't create money out of thin air. They had to have gold reserves to back their lending. The Federal Reserve changed everything. Here's the mechanism they created. Step 1. The government needs money. The US government wants to spend money it doesn't have. Instead of raising taxes or cutting spending, it issues bonds, IOUs. These bonds promise to pay back the loan with interest. Step 2. The Fed buys the bonds. The Federal Reserve purchases these government bonds. But here's the trick. The Fed doesn't have money sitting in a vault. It creates the money out of nothing. Literally. It types numbers into a computer or used to print them on paper and exchanges this newly created money for government bonds. Step 3. The government spends the money. Now the government has money to spend. This new money enters the economy through government spending, military contracts, social programs, salaries, whatever. But this isn't money that was saved or earned. It's money that was created from nothing. Step 4. You pay the interest. The government owes the Federal Reserve interest on those bonds. Where does the government get money to pay interest? From taxes. From you. You work, you earn money, you pay taxes, and those taxes go to pay interest on money that was created from nothing. Step 5. The bank's profit. The Federal Reserve is owned by private banks. Member banks are required to buy stock in the Fed.
And if I can say this, your labor pays the interest to the bankers. Our labor pays off the interest, of the money borrowed by the government back to the bankers. That's why the government doesn't mind having all these different benefits and programs and contracts. Because they get the money, from the bankers. They spend the money and you pay the interest on the money that they borrow. You see? It's a hell of a system, man. All right. And I know economists, I stay surface level with it, try to simplify as much as possible. All right. But I know enough, all right, that this shit is rigged. Okay. I won. You what? All right. I lost. All right. That's how the system works.
They receive a 6% annual dividend on that stock paid from the Fed's profits. And the Fed's profits come from the interest on government bonds, interest paid by taxpayers. So here's what really happens. The Federal Reserve creates money from nothing, loans it to the government spends it into the economy, you pay taxes to cover the interest, and the banks that own the Fed collect that interest as profit. You're working to pay interest on money that was created from nothing by private banks. This is the system the 7 men at Jekyll Island created. The Jekyll Island meeting ended in late November 1910. The bankers had their legislation. Now they needed to get it through Congress. This took 3 years of careful political maneuvering. First, they couldn't present it as the bankers' plan. Senator Aldrich introduced it as the Aldrich Plan in 1912, but it went nowhere. Everyone knew Aldrich was a banker ally. Democrats, who controlled the House, rejected it immediately. The bankers needed a new strategy. In 1912, Woodrow Wilson won the presidency. Wilson was a Democrat who had campaigned against the money trust and Wall Street power. He seemed like the last person who would support a banker's central bank. But Wilson had a problem. His campaign was bankrupt. He needed funding. Enter the bankers. Paul Warburg and other Jekyll Island conspirators supported Wilson's campaign through intermediaries. They gave him money, they gave him advice, and they gave him a chief advisor, Colonel Edward House, who was deeply connected to banking interests. After Wilson won, House became his most trusted advisor.
And you see how these presidents, all right, whoever the bankers back, that's who the president is. Okay, and the system has, so if they was using Woodrow Wilson as a dude boy, all right, what do you think Trump is? Okay? If they were using Woodrow Wilson as a do boy, all right, in the 19 teens, okay, what the hell you think Trump is, man? Because it has gotten, more and more corrupt since then. There was a little pushback, from certain politicians, okay? And it wasn't because those Edomite politicians was righteous, okay? It was just they knew that these niggas wanted everything, okay? They knew that these niggas were trying to get everything, okay? And if you're not a part of these certain families, all right, you're not in on the play, okay? But now you fast forward to Trump, okay? Ain't no real president, man. Okay, ain't no real government. Okay, they all right on the payroll of the elites. Okay, what we're getting is a WWF wrestling match. Okay, WrestleMania between the Republicans and Democrats. They're not controlling any real policies, okay, that affect these global systems. Okay, and these things that's getting ready to be rolled out. Okay, they make this big deal about what's her name? Major Taylor Greene, whatever her name is. Okay, like her quitting was some major thing. Okay, no. Okay, these senators, all right, light work. Okay, they no different than the niggas showing up to work at Target. Okay, no power. All right.
And House pushed hard for the Fed. The Jekyll Island plan was rebranded as the Federal Reserve Act, sponsored by Democratic congressmen to make it look like a reform against the banks. Not for them. Key Democrats, including Carter Glass and Robert Owen, were convinced that this was necessary to prevent another panic of 1907. The bill was introduced in December 1913. Here's where the timing gets suspicious. Congress was scheduled to adjourn for Christmas recess on December 19th. Many congressmen had already bought train tickets home. But at the last minute, the leadership pushed for a vote before recess. The Federal Reserve Act was voted on December 23rd, 1913. Most congressmen had already left Washington for Christmas. Those who remained were exhausted and eager to leave. The bill was over 1,000 pages. Almost no one had read it fully. The House passed it 298 to 60. The Senate...
A 1,000-page bill. There's no telling what was in there. A 1,000-page bill.
Passed it 43 to 25. Wilson signed it the same day, December 23rd, 1913. 3 years after the secret meeting at Jekyll Island, the bankers had their central bank, and they did it on December 23rd, when most of Congress was gone and no one was paying attention. Charles Lindbergh Sr., congressman from Minnesota and father of the famous aviator, understood what had happened. He said, "This act establishes the most gigantic trust on earth. When the president signs this bill, the invisible government by the money power will be legalized. The greatest crime of Congress is its currency system. The worst legislative crime of the ages is perpetrated by this banking bill." He was right, but it was too late. The Federal Reserve opened for business on November 16th, 1914. Benjamin Strong, who'd been at Jekyll Island, became the first governor of the New York Fed. Paul Warburg became a member of the Federal Reserve Board. The Jekyll Island conspirators were now running the system they designed in secret. What happened next proves why they wanted this power. World War I started 3 months before the Fed opened in 1914. Coincidence? Maybe. But what's not coincidence is what happened next. The Federal Reserve financed America's entry into World War I by creating money to buy government war bonds. This allowed the government to spend far beyond its tax revenues. The Fed created $25 billion in new money during the war, doubling the money supply. This benefited the banks enormously. They earned interest on the war bonds. They financed arms manufacturers. They loaned money to European allies. J.P. Morgan's bank became the sole purchasing agent for Britain and France and America, earning commissions on billions in war purchases. World War I made the banks rich. The Fed made it possible by creating unlimited money. After the war, the Fed kept interest rates low and credit easy. This fueled the stock market bubble of the 1920s. Everyone borrowed money to invest in stocks. Prices soared. Bankers got rich off lending and underwriting.
This is why I stopped shopping on Amazon, and you should too. Don't.
Strong, running the New York Fed, deliberately kept rates low despite warnings about speculation. Why? Because higher rates would have killed the bubble, and the bubble was making his banker friends wealthy. In 1929, the bubble popped. The stock market crashed. Banks failed across America. Unemployment hit 25%. It was far worse than the panic of 1907.
And what these devils do, they allow you to get in and enjoy, abundance for moments and pockets of time. All right. And people come under the illusion like the system is working for them. The roaring 50s. These things are designed. Okay. They can allow prosperity and they can shut up prosperity. Okay. This is the power these devils have had. Okay. Over the banking systems for over a century. Okay. So they can open up prosperity and they can close up prosperity. This is why these devils have a God complex, and the digital system is meant to take this to a whole nother level. Okay, they want control of way more than money now. They want your spirit. Okay. Let it play.
Here's the revealing part. The Federal Reserve had been created specifically to prevent panics and bank failures, but the Great Depression was worse than anything that came before. The Fed failed at its stated mission. Or did it? The Fed didn't fail the banks. It failed the public. During the Depression, the big banks, the ones that owned the Fed, bought up failed smaller banks at pennies on the dollar. JP Morgan, Chase, National Citibank came out of the Depression bigger and more powerful than before. The Fed could have expanded the money supply to prevent deflation. It could have been a lender of last resort to failing banks. Instead, it let the money supply contract by 1/3. This destroyed small banks and businesses, but allowed the big banks to consolidate power. This is what the Jekyll Island system was designed to do: protect the big banks, concentrate power, and extract wealth from everyone else. World War II followed the same pattern. The Fed created money to finance World War II. Government debt exploded from $40 billion to $260 billion. The Fed bought government bonds, creating money to fund the war. Banks earned interest on the bonds. Defense contractors got rich. The public paid through inflation and taxes. In 1971, President Nixon completely severed the dollar's link to gold. Before 1971, dollars were theoretically convertible to gold. After 1971, the dollar became pure fiat currency, backed by nothing except the government's promise and the Fed's printing press. This gave the Fed unlimited power. If the dollar is backed by nothing, there's no limit to how many dollars the Fed can create. Let me show you what the Fed has done with this power. When the banks nearly collapsed in 2008 due to their own reckless mortgage lending, the Fed created $4.5 trillion to bail them out. Not a single major bank failed. Not a single executive went to jail. The Fed created money, bought toxic assets from banks, and made them whole. Meanwhile, 10 million Americans lost their homes to foreclosure.
Now, I want to pay attention to this, because they make it seem as if, all right, immigrants, the welfare queens, okay, they make it seem as if they're the problem with the economy. All right. Now, niggas are a problem, but niggas aren't the reason of a poor economy. Okay. 2/3 got to go. Okay. We can agree to that. All right. But to say they're the problem of the economy, absolutely not. Now, look at these numbers. Okay. That's going to be given to the big banks for bailouts and the people that suffer behind these wealth grabs. All these recessions and depressions, this is nothing but wealth grabs. Okay, to destroy the wealth, okay, in the middle class, okay, to the, you see, because they pushing everybody to the poor. All right, they pushing everyone to the poor class that's outside, okay, of these elite families. Okay, so let's play this.
Done with this power. When the banks nearly collapsed in 2008 due to their own reckless mortgage lending, the Fed created $4.5 trillion to bail them out. Not a single major bank failed. Not a single executive went to jail. The Fed created money, bought toxic assets from banks, and made them whole. Meanwhile, 10 million Americans lost their homes to foreclosure. Unemployment hit 10%. Middle-class wealth collapsed. The banks that owned the Fed were rescued. You weren't. In March 2020, when COVID hit and markets crashed, the Fed created $4 trillion in 6 months. It bought government bonds, corporate bonds, even junk bonds. It gave unlimited loans to banks at zero interest. The result? Stock markets hit all-time highs. Billionaires gained $1.8 trillion in wealth. Meanwhile, 40 million Americans filed for unemployment. Small businesses closed by the hundreds of thousands. The Fed created $4 trillion. Almost none of it went to working people. It went to banks, corporations, and the wealthy who own financial assets. By 2021, all that money creation caught up to reality. Inflation hit 9%, the highest in 40 years. Your money lost purchasing power. Gas, food, rent, everything got more expensive. The Fed's solution? Raise interest rates, which made borrowing more expensive, killed jobs, and crashed the economy into recession. Regular people lose their jobs. Banks keep making money on higher interest rates. This is the system working as designed. Since the Federal Reserve was created in 1913, the US dollar has lost 98% of its purchasing power. What cost $1 in 1913 costs $32 today. Your money loses value every year because the Fed constantly creates more money, diluting what you already have. This isn't accidental. This is inflation by design. The Fed targets 2% inflation annually. That means they deliberately devalue your money by 2% every year. Over a lifetime, your savings lose half their value. Meanwhile, the banks that own the Fed profit enormously. The Fed holds $5 trillion in government bonds. It collects interest on those bonds, interest paid by your tax dollars. In 2023 alone, the Fed earned over $100 billion in interest from the government. The Fed sets the interest rates that determine your mortgage, your car loan, your credit card rate, and your savings account return. When rates are low, you earn nothing on savings, but the banks borrow cheap. When rates are high, you pay more on debt, but banks earn more. The big banks know they'll always be bailed out. They can take enormous risks because the Fed will create money to rescue them if they fail. You have no such protection. When the Fed creates new money, it doesn't distribute it equally. It gives it to banks first. Banks get the new money when it has full purchasing power. By the time that money circulates to wages and prices, it's been diluted. This transfers wealth from wage earners to asset owners, from you to them. You work harder for money that's worth less every year. They create money from nothing and collect interest on it. This is the Jekyll Island system. Remember those 7 men at Jekyll Island? The institutions they represented now control the Federal Reserve. JP Morgan's bank is now JP Morgan Chase, one of the largest member banks of the Federal Reserve and one of the biggest shareholders of the New York Fed. National City Bank is now Citibank, another massive Fed member bank and shareholder. The Rockefeller interests that controlled National City Bank through William Rockefeller are now dispersed through various banks and investment firms, but they still hold enormous influence in the system. The structure they designed ensures this. Member banks own the Federal Reserve. They elect 6 of the 9 directors of each regional Fed bank. The Federal Reserve Bank of New York, the most powerful, is dominated by the biggest Wall Street banks. Who owns the Federal Reserve? It's not the government, it's the banks. And who are the biggest banks? JP Morgan Chase, Citibank, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, all descendants of or connected to the Jekyll Island conspirators. The Fed claims to be independent. Independent from whom? Independent from Congress, which represents the people, but not independent from the banks, which own it. Since 1913, the Federal Reserve has never been fully audited by Congress. Efforts to audit the Fed,
And it never will be. All right. It's going to be a Howard Shah. Okay. It's going to come take this place down, man. Complete wickedness, man. You know. So let's go here. Yeah, man. So it's rigged on another level. You know, this place is rigged on a whole nother level. You know, that's why you're still, you know, people are crying out, but this was the intention from the beginning. All right. So when you go to James, and then the scriptures call this out, you know, that's why we went into those precepts in the beginning. It says, come quickly now. This is James 5:1. Come quickly now. All right, you rich who lack true faith and hoard and misuse your resources, weep and howl over the miseries, the woes, going back to these woes, this destruction, the judgments that are coming upon you, man. Okay, going back to, all right, these woes, man. All right, this devil has earned all this judgment that's coming to him, man. Okay, ain't no salvation in this man's. His whole lineage is gonna pay for this, man. Okay, this man has done a lot of wickedness in the earth, man. Woes, the judgments that are coming unto him, man. You see, who misuse their resources, the devil. Because there's a righteous way to rule the earth, man. Okay? Even like that, he could have been just a little corrupt. Like, this nigga took it there. You know, he could have just been a little off, man. This nigga took it there, man. This is crazy. All right? The system that this man has in place. Okay? Let's go here to the book of Habakkuk, chapter 2 and 9. All right. This is the book of Habakkuk, chapter 2 and verse 9. And it says, whoa. You see? Hey, nothing but judgment, man. I don't know what nigga got salvation out of this, man. All right, which we know, like I say, them niggas sell out, but you Israelites that's running with this and believing it, man. What you're not into the Bible, man. Okay, this ain't for you, man. Whoa, judgment is coming to him who obtains wicked gain for his house, his lineage. Okay, all these devils have benefited, some way more than others, but all these devils have benefited to some degree, man. Okay, and it says, woe, judgment is coming to him who obtains wicked gain for his house. All right, and thinks by doing so to set his nest on high, that he may be rescued from the hand of evil. Nah, you're going to see evil times. Okay, you devils are going to see evil times, bad times. Okay, everything that you built, okay, is about to be completely obliterated, man. Your infrastructure, your wicked system that you got in place, these puppet governments, and your AI infrastructure you're trying to, all this is going to be destroyed, man. Okay. Habakkuk 2 and 10 said, you have devised a shameful thing for your house. Okay, by cutting off and putting an end to many people, because this man has destroyed and ruined people with this wicked system. Okay, whether through death, through these wars and conflicts, or poverty, famine everywhere. Okay, this man destroyed many people, okay, to hoard up all this wealth, man. It says, so you are sinning against your own life and forfeiting it, man. All this is going to count against this devil. Everything that he's done is going to count against him, man. It said, for the stone will cry out from the wall to accuse you, okay, built in sin. All right, so this infrastructure, everything that the devil has built is accusing the devil, man, because it's all built off fraudulent money, ill-gotten gain. Okay, so his own infrastructure and all these things that he's built up, okay, off this fraudulent gain is accusing him, man. It says, and the rafter will answer, all right, it out of the woodwork. Okay, and it says, whoa, judgment is coming to him who builds a city with bloodshed and establish a town by violence, man. Because they told you who just funded those two wars, who got rich off those two wars. Okay, the elites and their contractors, man, all Edomites, man. So this is why. All right, let's go here. We'll end it here. All right, this is Ecclesiastes 10 and 8, man. You already know. Sirach 10 and 8, it says, because of unrighteous dealings and injuries and riches got by deceit, the kingdom is translated from one people to another, man. All right, from Esau into Jacob, man. Okay, so yeah, man, the devil is done. Everything that he's established, all right, is going to be destroyed. Okay, all the riches, the true wealth that he got is going to be transferred, okay, to Israel, and he's going to captivity, man. Okay, so that was the point. Just wanted to get into that, Lord will, you brothers, all right, and you sisters edified once again, and give all praise and glory unto Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem Kapadash, and double honors unto the apostles and the elders of GMS, rule well, teach well, being great examples towards younger brothers, and peace and blessing salutations, hopefully. Shalom.